Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to see everyone joining this call and sharing in the chat your name and where you are joining us from. Um, we, as the California policy team for the Alzheimer's Association, are so excited to welcome you to our first of 3 parts in a storytelling training program. We're going to give folks just a couple of minutes to join, to get their Zoom set up, to work through all those requisite tech issues that always happen. And while we're waiting for everyone else to join, we would love for you to share in the chat your name, where you're based, and what your favorite movie or book is. And the reason we're going to talk about our favorite movie or book is because we're talking about storytelling, and we're talking about compelling elements of storytelling. And so we want you to start thinking about what are those stories that really stick with me? What are my favorites? What stays with me in a story? And how can I incorporate that into my advocacy?
Hi, I'm Dave Johnson, and I live in Arroyo Grande, California, halfway between LA and the city. We've been here like 50 years. The favorite books and writing, I am a sideline writer, as I call it. I used to write for my office. My favorite series of books are the history books on George Washington, Adams. I love the Adams book, Grant, those types of publications, which was my undergraduate major. And I'm looking forward to gaining some more talent in writing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And everyone, if we are going to get started with our formal program soon, but you can continue dropping in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. I think it just helps us understand the breadth and depth of our community, and really the fact that we're sharing from across our whole state, which is so excited. We have lots of perspectives on this call, so do feel free to drop in the chat your name and your location. And since we are at 5:32, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our formal program, and I'm just loving seeing everyone dropping their info into the chat. So this call has both people who are very experienced Alzheimer's advocates, people who we work with closely, and we also have a lot of people on this call who are totally new to Alzheimer's advocacy. And that is so exciting because, like I mentioned, the more perspectives that we're able to share with our audience of elected officials, the more we're able to emphasize how important our issues are and how urgent it is that we pass our policy platform. So we really hope that this storytelling series will help everyone joining, both our seasoned advocates and our newer advocates, to feel comfortable and confident in sharing your personal stories with our elected officials and even with other people we want to incorporate and get involved in our Alzheimer's advocacy, so that we can help advance Alzheimer's research and improve the landscape of care and support services for people impacted by Alzheimer's. So today you can see on your screen a brief overview of what we will be talking about on our call today. We'll start with a little bit of a discussion on the impact of Alzheimer's storytelling, or just why storytelling is so important for policy advocacy. And we will have a really wonderful, stellar advocate share an example of a really great 3-minute story. And then we'll discuss the key elements of storytelling. And we'll have an interactive group session where we'll be in breakout rooms and talk together about our own stories, how to incorporate those key storytelling elements into our stories for advocacy. And then once we've done that and spent some time talking and working together, we'll come back into a larger group and share as a community what we've learned from each other, what tools we might need to continue improving our storytelling for advocacy, and really just getting to appreciate, all the diversity of our stories and how powerful they really are individually and especially together. We'll also be referencing during this training the storytelling worksheet that we sent around in advance of this call. And so one of my colleagues is going to drop a link to that worksheet in the chat now. And that is for your reference as we move through this training and talk about how to begin identifying those really key elements of our story. So we can go to the next slide. Thanks so much. So the reason we're having this training series is because storytelling is a really powerful, highly effective advocacy tool for policy advocacy. And the reason for that is because our audience for policy advocacy is people. Those people are typically staffers for elected officials, or our audience is the elected official themselves. But regardless, they're people, they're human. When we tell a story about how Alzheimer's has impacted us or our family, rather than sharing a statistic, a number, or a data point alone, we instantly enable our audience to see that what we're talking about isn't some intangible, far removed, distant policy concern, but it helps our audience to understand that what we're talking about is actually a deeply felt reality for so many people in our communities. Multiple high-level studies have also shown that this humanizing element of stories really enables our audience to better understand and retain what we're saying. And of course, we want our audience to retain this information and understand it so that they will take action in supporting our policy platform to benefit our community. And storytelling is also so effective in policy advocacy because it helps to create a more collegial, collaborative dynamic with your audience rather than sharing opinions or arguments might. Think about it, right? No one can argue with you about your story because it's yours, and that's very powerful. So with that primer, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Nina, who will introduce you to one of our advocates who will be sharing her story with us today.
Hey, folks. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nina Musavi, and I am one of the directors of advocacy at the Alzheimer's Association. Great to see some folks who we recognize and some new names and faces. It's just really beautiful to have so many people here who are interested in learning how to tell their story effectively. So before we dive into the elements of storytelling and the worksheet and the breakout rooms and all of that stuff, we really wanted to have one of our longtime advocates join us to talk about their story and give you a good example of a 3-minute story. So I am here to introduce Latrice Brown. Latrice is caring for her mother and first started using her story to advocate for change when she came to Alzheimer's Advocacy Day in Sacramento in 2023. Since then, Latrice has shared her story with members of Congress at our National Advocacy Forum in Washington, D.C., in local meetings with state legislators, as well as at the meeting in Sacramento, and in a really beautifully written blog and some letters to the editor. We're really grateful for Latrice's powerful advocacy in this fight and her willingness to share this 3-minute story and give you a really great example. So Latrice, it's on to you.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful welcome. Hello, my name is Latrice, and I am a caregiver for my 73-year-old mother who has vascular dementia. 9 years ago, my mom asked for my help. She was recently released from the hospital, and she had been in the hospital for malnutrition and for high blood pressure, which she'd had for years, and to get that back on track. After she asked for my help after her release, I attended a few medical appointments with her, and I discovered that she had been prescribed what I like to call, affectionately, of course, the dementia cocktail, which is memantine and Aricept. She had been prescribed this for some time, and she'd been on that medication. And so I was confused by this. I was like, what is this? And when I Googled it, it was saying that it was used for Alzheimer's and dementia, and I didn't know that she had that. And no one said anything like that at the doctor's office. And so I kind of went down a Google rabbit hole and figured out that she was in the deep throes of dementia and Alzheimer's. And from then on, it was a whirlwind of specialists and neurologists, which are not easy to come by in my county, Contra Costa County, and both of which were quite dismissive, actually. It was really very much like medical gaslighting, trying to get everyone to provide an actual diagnosis for her. And it wasn't until 4 years from that that she kind of took off in her car in 2019 for 36 hours. And we had to find her. When we got her back, we took her to the hospital. And a rather dismissive young doctor was like, "Well, yeah, she has vascular dementia," and I I had to contain myself because I was very upset. I was very angry in that moment, and I had to kind of get over that. But I stepped out of the room and got over with that. And from that moment on, they sent her home with us with no instructions and no help. She was clearly going to need to be with us, and we would just kind of have to figure it out. And that's where we've been ever since. So we've been caring for her daily ever since. And I advocate so that others won't be in this position. I advocate so that people have time to plan, so that we can pass bills, and that Congress or somebody can help us and the people like us who have jobs and now have parents to care for or spouses to care for. I advocate for all of us, and I don't want anyone to be in this position ever if we can avoid it. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Latrice. That was so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing. I know it's not always easy to share a story that can be so emotional. Thank you, Latrice. Everybody in the chat, please give your praises for Latrice sharing her story. All right, we're going to keep going through the agenda. And the next piece that I'm going to talk to you about is actually the key elements of storytelling. So we really like to boil it down to 4 kind of key elements as you're putting your story together. And this is a baseline for you to start with. And then as you really start honing on your story, you'll be able to make tweaks and modifications as you're moving through. And you might find that one element resonates more with your story than another. So it doesn't have to be 25% of each of these elements, but these are really the 4 main ones we like to touch on. So if I can get the next slide, I am going to talk first about authenticity. So one of the most important elements of storytelling is authenticity, and you are the owner of your story. You are the person who knows your story best, and you are the most trusted messenger of your story. So as long as you are coming to the table with an authentic desire to share your story, you don't need to overhype, you don't need to over exaggerate your story and the parts of your story that you're trying to share. You can be as authentic as possible in telling your story, and that is the most effective way to be in that meeting and to tell that story. We talk about authenticity in a couple ways as well, because we like to talk about it in a way that it relates to trust. When you're coming into any situation where you're telling your story, especially to a legislator, you are giving them a piece of your time and they are giving you a piece of their time. And so they trust that you're not going to waste it, and you trust that they're not going to waste it. So as long as you are authentic in your delivery and in the facts that you're sharing and in the stories that you're sharing in your story, the elements of that story, that authenticity will shine through, and it creates a level of trust in that conversation that allows us to move forward really effectively with conversations about change. So number 1 element there is authenticity. The second element I'm going to talk about, if I can get the next slide there. There we go. Perfect. The next element is emotion. So I know that when we prep our advocates and our storytellers, they often try to hold back from being emotional. They often say, I don't want to cry, so I'm not putting parts of our of our story into this, because I don't want to cry, or I don't want to get emotional, I don't want to get angry. It's actually really effective to allow your emotions to show in a controlled way as you're telling your story. It it adds to the impact that legislators have, because they can see how much this situation that you're in, the situation that your family in, impacts you, to the point where, despite the emotion that it causes you, despite the sadness or the anger or the frustration it causes you, you are willing to take your time, to volunteer your time, to fly to Sacramento, to drive to Sacramento, to fly to Washington, D.C., to take time out of your day for a district meeting. That emotion is so powerful and so important for you that you're willing to take that time, and you're willing to go and tell that story, and you're willing to put yourself in a vulnerable place. The emotion piece of your story, it adds a layer of vulnerability that is so authentic. So the emotion really relates that authenticity, that vulnerability that the emotion brings to the table. It adds such an important element of authenticity and trust. And I can tell you that we have had advocates who have come to tears as they are telling their story, again, in a way that they're still able to tell their story, but they tear up. They need to take a moment to contain themselves, or to hold back the tears. And when that happens, I have seen them bring members of Congress and members of the state legislature to tears as well. That emotion is so powerful. So that's the second element. So we've got number one, authenticity, number two, emotion. And we're going to go to number three here, which is sensory details. So if you heard in Latrice's story about how, when they went to that doctor's office and the doctor kind of very plainly said, well, yeah, your mother has vascular dementia, the feeling that Latrice felt, like, you felt it in there because she gave those sensory details. So when you're telling your story, if you remember, maybe the first time you took your loved one to a doctor, it was blistering hot outside, and you remember that you were, so hot and sweating, and also at the same time holding back tears, and also so frustrated by the situation and trying to make sure that your loved one is taken care of. If those are the sensory details that you felt in that first doctor's visit, include that in there. If you remember the pain you felt when you found out the news, or the first time that your loved one maybe forgot your name, talk about those details. Talk about the maybe your favorite blanket that you used to have that your mother knit for you. Now your mother doesn't know how to knit anymore, and that blanket is so soft and it's so comforting. That's a sensory detail that adds an element to your story that the people listening can actually be brought into your story. They can feel that soft blanket. They can feel that summer heat on that day as you're waiting outside this doctor's office and you're so nervous for what the results are going to be. They can be in there with that story for you. And the more that you bring people into that story with you, the more that they are going to internalize it themselves and be brought to a place where it moves them to action. And when we talk about our members of Congress and our members of the state legislature, we have to remember that every day they are hearing from dozens, if not hundreds, of constituents who have stories to tell about bills that need to be passed, about diseases that their loved one is dealing with, about funding for research that they need. And all of these stories are so worthwhile, and all of these causes are so worthwhile. And so we have to differentiate our story in a way that makes them prioritize it. Even if they don't have a personal connection to the story, if we include these sensory details and the emotion and the authenticity, we're able to bring them into the space with us so that they feel like they have a personal connection to it, and they are more likely to be moved and called to action. So those are the top three. I'm going to do one more for you. So we've got authenticity, we've got emotion, and we've got sensory details. And the last is a little bit more of a structural element to your story. You want a beginning, middle, and end. So if you noticed in Latrice's story, she started with the beginning of their story, getting that diagnosis, realizing that her mother was living with this disease. And then the middle of the story is figuring out, how do we cope? What in our life changes? What experiences are we going through? And then the end was present day for Latrice and her family. So think about that beginning, middle, and end. You don't always have to start with the beginning of your experience. You might have a loved one who's been living with this disease for 15 years. You don't have to tell that whole 15-year story in one 3-minute block of time. That's not enough time to tell the whole 15-minute story. So if that's your experience, maybe pick a 6-month time period that was really rough for you, or pick a 6-month time period that was really a source of hope for you as you're going through this entire 15-year journey. If it's 15 years for you, decide on a piece of it and pick a beginning, middle, and end there. If this is a relatively new journey that you are, if this experience is new for your family, your story might not have an end yet. And so the end, like Latrice's end, is actually the present, but it's a part of that structure of your story that allows for you to build in the emotion and the sensory detail in a way that the person listening can follow along with it. So that structure of beginning, middle, and end, it adds to that element of authenticity, because it means you're coming to the conversation prepared and you're able to tell this cohesive story in 3 minutes and for it to have an impact. So those are your 4 elements. And I'm going to remind you: authenticity, emotion, sensory detail, and beginning, middle, and end. And I'll have one of my colleagues put that in the chat as well, so you have it in front of you. So next, I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do in our breakout rooms. So we're actually going to be going over the worksheet that we shared with you all in an email. Sorry, it took me a moment to remember how we shared it. We shared it with you all in an email ahead of time. And we also shared it in the chat with you at the beginning, and my colleague Danielle just dropped it in the chat again. So this is a worksheet that we created for you all to use as you are starting to craft your 3-minute story. And during this call, we are going to do a breakout session where you're going to fill in this worksheet and start actually telling your story to other volunteer advocates who are on this call with you, and you're going to practice that story. So let me quickly go through the pieces and the questions on this worksheet. So it'll look a little bit different for you in the actual worksheet form, but we've put it in a PowerPoint slide for you. So the first question here is: name 3 things you love about your loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia. This is so powerful, to being able to weave those into your story, to be able to say, my loved one was so independent. They would always go on walks by themselves, and I loved that every time they went on a walk, they stopped to smell the flowers, right? That's a thing that you are able to weave into that story. The next thing you're going to do in this worksheet is you're going to imagine your journey with Alzheimer's or dementia as a movie. So remember, I said if your journey is 15 years long, that 15 years is a long time. That'd be a pretty long movie. So describe a moment that you would turn into a movie or an episode of a TV show, right? That was something pivotal that happened to you. I know for myself, with my story, the pivotal moment was when my mother-in-law didn't recognize me anymore. She knew that I was somebody who was friendly and that she could trust, but she didn't recognize me anymore. And it happened up in the Bay Area at a restaurant as I was walking up to her. And I remember that moment so, so clearly. She had no idea who I was. So that moment for me would be the time I would talk about. That would be the part of my story. So then you're going to talk about what sensory details from that moment you remember. So I remember I was carrying a tray of food. We were at a little Indian cafeteria, and I was carrying a tray of food, had a big piece of naan that was falling off of the tray, and she did not remember me. And I stopped in my tracks and I didn't know how to handle the situation. That's the sensory detail I would talk about. And how did this moment make you feel? Right. So I would talk about how all of the blood rushed out of my face and I felt cold and I felt scared and I felt like I didn't know how to handle the situation. And then we ask you for the last piece of this worksheet is to tell your story using only 6 words. I know it's really hard. This is just an exercise for the worksheet. Just try to boil it down to 6 words and then try to use those words as you're putting together your 3-minute story. And then for everybody, after this, after we finish this call, take this worksheet and actually draft down your 3-minute story. Write it down, a pen and paper, put it on a computer, put it in an email somewhere, but actually draft it down. Take these notes and put it down for yourself. It'll be really helpful later on, I promise. All right, so in a couple of minutes, we're gonna break you out into your breakout rooms. As we mentioned, you're gonna be in groups of 3 people, all advocates. So these are all people of varying levels of experience with advocacy. Some of these folks have been doing this with us for years. Some of these folks are brand new. This is their first time engaging in storytelling. So we wanted to give a little bit of guidance on how to share constructive feedback. So first and foremost, remember, this is such an emotional issue for everybody. Please be positive and affirmative as you are giving this feedback. You are the owner of your own story. Nobody can tell you that your story is wrong or that your story isn't the right story to share. Whatever story you choose to share is the right story. So in thinking about giving constructive feedback, please remember to be positive and affirmative. And remember to mirror back what you hear. So that can be, an example of that can be, hey, Joe Smith, I heard you say X, Y, and Z. I thought that was really powerful, or that made me feel really, as I was really a part of your story, right? Make sure to mirror back what you're hearing. And then be curious. Do not make any assumptions that somebody else's story is similar to yours or the same as yours without knowing. Be curious about why somebody maybe shared a certain element of their journey instead of another one. All right, that is those are just some notes on our constructive feedback. Please remember that. I don't have any anticipation that anybody is gonna do anything but those amazing pieces of constructive feedback for folks. Okay, so we are now going to send you to your breakout rooms. I want to explain how that works as it's happening. So if my colleagues can open the breakout rooms, you are going to be with 3 other people. Take a moment to fill out the worksheet. If you haven't already, if you have already filled it out, that's wonderful. Take a couple minutes to fill out that worksheet. And then you are going to take turns sharing your 3-minute story. You have about 15 minutes in these groups. So take a turn to share your 3-minute story and then get feedback from the other people in your breakout group. So to join the breakout rooms, you're going to see a prompt come up on your screen. If you are on a laptop or a desktop computer, it'll just pop up right there on your screen. If you're on a phone, it will also pop up on your screen, and it will say, do you want to join breakout room number? And there will be a number. Just click join there. We are automatically assigning you to a breakout room, so all you have to do is click join once it pops up on your screen. Again, any other device that you're on, laptop, desktop, or phone, it will be on there. Once you get into the breakout room, please introduce yourself, first and last name, where you're from, and then take turns to share your 3-minute stories. If you need a couple of minutes to fill out your worksheet, that's totally fine. Please take that in your breakout room. And remember, you are the expert of your own story. So this is just a practice round. It does not have to be perfect. It can very much be a rough draft of what you want to share. And you can brainstorm with your fellow advocates about which story to tell if you're not sure. So we're going to break you out into breakout rooms now. Veronica, I think you've got that set.
You should all have a room to join.
Someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're all back from our breakout rooms. So welcome back. I hope you all had a really wonderful time hearing from each other. I hope that you were able to learn together and maybe think through ways you can improve your story. Now, because we're here all on this call together, and because we feel so strongly that this community of advocates is so powerful and inspiring, we'd really like to hear from you all. For the next few minutes, we'd just like to hear from you about how you felt to think about and remember and then share your story. Was there any insights you gained from listening to the stories of your group members? And what do you feel like you still need? What do you think could help you to continue to hone and shape your story into an effective advocacy tool? And y'all are welcome to drop your answers in the chat, but we also encourage you to come off mute if you're willing to. And I'm going to remove the spotlight so that we can see all of us as a group. I see Shauna's raising her hand. So Shauna, if you want to get us started with a sharing session, let's get into it.
Hi, Zoe. Thank you for doing this. It's good to see your face. I've been doing this for about 7 years, and I have, my story has always, I've almost felt like I've had a bit of imposter syndrome almost, because I did lose my grandmother and my great aunt to this disease, but they were diagnosed back in the 90s, and my grandmother, my last relative, died in 2006. So it's been very far in my past, but obviously not because I'm talking about it. And it was just really good to be speaking with my other 2 advocates who are very much dealing with this in the present moment, and realize that I can still have it's a story that's worthy. I didn't think that it wasn't worthy, but it's just, I know I have a way where I can actually bring this more into the present time for me. I was having some trouble with it, but it was good to hear and talk to other people.
Yeah, I love that. I actually had a very similar experience recently where I was talking with one of my advocates, and she was sharing that she felt her story didn't matter as much as one of her team members, because her team member is a caregiver right now, whereas she had been a caregiver in the past, and unfortunately her loved one had passed.
Well, I'm Tony Gonzalez in DC, Tony and Corey Gonzalez. So I was like, talk about
that's.
But he's the one who got me re-energized and angry, because he's in our same place, our same county, and he's still to this day, 20 years later, is having the same issues of trying to find care that I was having, and that just got me angry.
Yeah, so, exactly. And I was sharing with that advocate too. I was saying, my loved ones who had Alzheimer's also passed, unfortunately. And I miss them, and I advocate in their honor. And I also advocate in the rest of my family's honor, because we know that there's a genetic component to this disease. And so I think that was a helpful reframe, is just to think, even if this is a connection of yours, that even if your loved one has already passed, your story is so powerful, and we need to make this change for future community members, so that they don't have to go through what we went through in quite the same way. Yeah. And I'm seeing more raised hands, but I'm going to remove the spotlight so I can see who is talking. I see a raised hand for a Zoe Bowles. One of the other Zoe Bowleses. A Zoe Bowles with a beard. If you would like to join us in chat.
Lewis, me?
Hi, yeah.
Hi. No, I just wanted to recap what you were saying about, just because your loved one that had Alzheimer's is not with us anymore. I think it's important that those people stay with us, you know, because they're able to help people who are just coming on board in this disease. Their stories are relevant no matter how old they are. And I find people who, if their loved one is passed, if they still want to stay engaged with us, are very important to us, very important to have with us, because they have a passion around it now that they want to help others because they know what they went through, you know. So I don't, I guess I'm saying I don't want anybody to feel like they shouldn't be here or be a part of this just because their loved one passed. No, you should be.
I agree.
Absolutely agree. You gave me chills. That's powerful. And I think, yeah, that's also what's so powerful in community, right? Is we can encourage each other. We can share that and remind each other, your story matters. Please share it. We all benefit when we share our stories together. I see a raised hand from Kaloa Dillard.
Zoe with a beard. That was very moving. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, you said my name right, so don't worry about stumbling. I just wanted to say, Zoe with a beard, I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Lewis.
Mr. Lewis. I appreciate what you're saying because I agree with you that, you know, just because your loved one passed, I wrote it in the comments, even though our loved ones will eventually pass, as will we, you will continue to advocate in their honor.
That's
So
right.
the advocacy continues. While my loved ones, I've had one pass and my mother is still living with early onset. I advocate for my grandmother. I advocate for my mother. I advocate for the neighbor who's going through the same thing that I don't know. You know, I'm speaking up. I'm in grad school focusing on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, advocating for the San Diego community, advocating for the Black community who keep it secret, who just keep it family, who don't go to the doctors, and trying to encourage them to go to the doctors, to take their medications. It's not just about having a family member, just even the work that you're doing. It's just having the passion, the care, and, you know, the heart to advocate is enough. That you don't just have to have that personal lived experience. But I just wanted to comment on that really quickly. But also I wanted to say, sharing in the group, I'm typically an open book. Like I said, I'm in grad school. The first thing I say when I introduce is I've been a caregiver since 2019. I caregiver for my grandmother and my mother, who was diagnosed with early onset, just letting everybody know. And me being open about that it surprisingly has brought a lot of people on the side, you know, during breaks in class or in the hallways to talk to me and be like, I'm going through it too, but I don't want to talk about it. Or, you know, they ask me for advice or tips because nobody really knows how to navigate the disease, you know, once it happens. And, you know, through my mistakes or through my own personal research, I can guide them and help them advocate for their families as well. But I felt vulnerable sharing it, as I don't know the people in my group, but it was okay. It was a good vulnerable because I'm passionate about the advocacy and sharing sharing stories. I think everybody should share their stories because every story is different. And there's joy, sadness, and all of that within the, you know, the process or the journey of Alzheimer's. So sharing it in the end, I was like, not a bad emotional, but a happy emotional. And, you know, I just, you know, hope it came across that way as well to my group members. We, of course, ran out of time, but I mean, everybody has a story and they look different, and I think they're all wonderful, and I'd love to hear everyone's, but we don't have to do that.
Yeah, I think you know, it is so emotional to share our stories, and it's that vulnerability and that emotion that makes stories so effective for advocacy. But that's something we take very seriously, is that it's it's not an emotionless act to share something so personal. And I always feel so privileged and honored to hear other people's stories, to see the similarities and differences that folks experienced it versus my own family. And I just think it's so powerful, and we are so grateful to everybody for being so generous and so brave with their stories, especially sharing in this context where we're really just practicing with people who we might not know very well. That takes some real courage, and it just shows a commitment to policy advocacy and to making the world better for our community, right? Making the landscape of care and support services better, funding research to find a cure and to find treatment. So yeah, it's not something that we do without emotional labor, and we really treasure that. And so thank you to each of you for sharing your stories. I see more raised hands, but we are unfortunately coming up on the end of our time together for this first session. We are going to have 2 more, and we're looking forward to seeing you at those other 2 sessions. Our next one is going to dive more into the specifics of our policy platform and really give you some tools to weave your story into the more specific policy advocacy. And in the interim, before our next session on September 12th, well, actually, I'll just talk about this. We had 2 more sessions coming up, as I just mentioned. The second one is on September 12th, where we'll, like I said, be talking more in detail about our policy priorities, our policy platforms, and what elements of your story can speak to what policy, et cetera. And then we'll also have another training session on October 10th. And I think it sounds like the folks on this call will really enjoy that one, because we'll be working a lot more in groups on that call, and we'll hear more from each other. And so at that point, we'll be able to really share our stories, but also our specific policy advocacy pitches on that call. And so I really look forward to that one and seeing how this training has helped us get to that point of effective policy advocacy through storytelling. There's also one more ask. I know we're at 6:30, but I just wanted to let you all know I'll send some email information around about this as well. But we would love for you to write out your 3-minute story and share it with your Alzheimer's Association policy staff person. If you don't already know who to contact, our photos and our geographic regions roughly are on this slide. So you can email your designated person. You can email really anyone on our team, and we'll get you to the right person. And then we're going to turn those stories into an advocacy action, into an introduction to our elected officials. And that's going to happen before our next training session. So if you could please send us your 3-minute stories, we'd love to help you turn that into an advocacy action. And we're really eager to read your stories and to work with you already on advocacy. And like I said, we know your time is precious. We're so grateful to you all for joining. This has been really encouraging and inspiring for me. I hope it was for you as well. So look out for an email from us with a recording of this training, with the slides included, and with registration links for our next 2 sessions. And we'll close there. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for
Thank you.
sharing your
Thank you.
stories.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
So
Thank you.
much.
Everyone.